Hello, everybody. I'm David Huff, CPA with DW Huff Consulting, bringing you the August 25th, 2023 edition of News from the Front Lines of Business. We try to help our small business clients to build, grow, and enjoy their wealth. So here we are, made it through another week. As usual, there's lots of interesting discussions and things to share with you that will help you on your journey. So I guess we'll just jump right in. So we're always talking about investing in real estate investing. So really, there's, I guess, all three of the topics today are somewhat related to that. And to start off, we're going to talk about real estate investing strategies involving short-term rentals as compared to long-term rentals. So, if you're watching, TikTok and whatever. And there's so many, gurus popping up giving advice on the short-term rental market, and we've seen that definitely over the last few years being highly profitable and good. But there are some considerations and pros and cons when you're thinking about a piece of property you have, and maybe it's in a vacation location where you could rent it out on a short-term basis. So short-term, we're talking about a few days here and there, less than a week usually, as opposed to a long-term, multi-year or single-year lease on a traditional way of thinking about rental properties. So I don't know. Everybody that you've seen online seems to make it look as though it's just like a sure thing, slam dunk. You buy a property somewhere, put it on Airbnb.com or Verbo, whatever, and you're gonna make millions of dollars. But there's some things to consider. All right, so short-term rentals, first of all, higher revenue. So yes, you can't argue with that. You're definitely here in the New Orleans area. You see the short-term nightly rates are upwards of 150 to 300 a night. So clearly, if you rent that thing for all 30 days in a month, it'll be much more than a comparable long-term rental. However, it operates more like you owning a hotel. So it's really just like it's competing with those hotels for visitors. It's like a hotel, and a hotel is a business, and people have to be there, on a daily basis, taking care of things, and also, I guess you really can't. I guess you got to change your mindset from a rental property owner to a hotel manager, because the amenities that are in the room, the cleaning service, and the potential for other, add-ons are more like you would see in a hotel versus a rental property. So, but with that active income, we are potentially subject to self-employment tax. So that's something we've seen misapplied frequently on tax returns that have taken over for other people. They'll put those rentals on the regular Schedule E. That's not correct, because on a short-term deal, when you're providing those services and support, that's Schedule C. If you're not operating in some sort of LLC or other type of entity. So, bad news as far as taxes, ordinary rates, and also you're going to be adding to some self-employment tax, possibly, depending on what, how you're operating. So be aware of that. It's not a regular Schedule E. Also, you have more involvement. So we talked about that a little bit, but not only in the daily operations of the actual room, but on the administration side. So you're going to be doing a lot more advertising, and probably have some kind of website in place in order to to get traffic to the website and booking and all the administrative stuff that goes on with receiving multiple payments during the course of the month, and and just administering things and managing staff. Because if you're not managing it and cleaning it yourself, you have to pay somebody else to do it. So more things to do by far. Also, the potential for regulatory challenges. So here in the New Orleans area, we see limitations on the amount of short-term rentals that are allowed to be licensed and active in any particular neighborhood. And once that limit is exceeded, that there's this lottery system in place that's fraught with problems and potential unfairness. So these short-term rentals get a pretty bad rap from the local neighborhoods, because I guess the potential for the people coming and going to be not the best neighbors, maybe loud and obnoxious. So there's a potential that you're operating a short-term rental could be limited. So even though you're supposed to be able to own a property and do what you want with it, operating as a short-term rental has some definite risk for over regulation. So Um, but compared to the long-term rental side, so the income is definitely more predictable, right? So most of the time, that's going to be at least a 12-month lease term. You know what the monthly payment's going to be, and typically people don't move out until the lease is up, so you have some idea of what the revenue is going to be. So that's definitely not the case with short term. And then, but what we do notice when you're comparing it to repairs, when people move out of a long-term rental, we just find even in the best case, there's more stuff that needs to be fixed. So, the short-term rentals, yeah, you could have there could be a case where a party or something takes place and just trashes the place, but for the most part, the frequency of the cleaning, just nothing really gets that badly broken as does in the long-term rental. So a lot of times you'll see a water leak and there's mold behind the sheetrock, and just more stuff that needs to be fixed every time somebody moves out. So that's a consideration. And of course, this income is all going to be considered passive, so that can be good or bad. Because when you have losses, there are limitations with the passive type income. So some things to think about there. There is definitely a difference in the category of the income. And obviously, as you have less day-to-day administration, this is truly nothing's passive, but this is truly closer to being a passive investment than your short-term stuff. So, that's the pro and cons of it, but it's definitely not the best answer for everybody going to the short-term, because it is really work. So. Another thing I'm seeing popping up regularly on TikTok and all these things, these gurus come on and they'll say, oh yeah, you got $100,000 income, we're gonna do a cost segregation study and knock it down to nothing. And the reason why I guess we need to kind of back up a little bit and think about what's going on there is, here's a recap of I guess how the depreciation calculation starts with a property. So once again, this is something I took from one of my Taxmaster Network presentations, of which I subscribe to. But when you got a piece of property, ordinarily it splits between land and structure. So land gets you no benefit whatsoever for depreciation costs under the old, I guess, I don't want to say outdated, but I guess the ordinary way of looking at it. If it's a residential real estate property, that 27.5 year life is going to be what you're going to use for determining your annual calculation. So if you paid $100,000 for property, you divide that $100,000 by 27.5, and every year that's going to be your depreciation deduction. Commercial property gets the 39-year treatment normally. So ordinarily, when you buy a property, it's not great for depreciation expense. Yeah, there is some depreciation, but then it's even under those rules, it still most of the time is a great benefit. But if you look a little bit further, land can be further broken into the land itself, which is still not depreciable, but improvements. All right, so improvement is a 15-year asset, and that would be things like your parking lot, maybe some light poles out in front, gardens, things like that would go into the land. So ordinarily, all that junk gets treated in a non-depreciable manner, but under this new way of looking at it, as a 15-year asset, and a 15-year asset is subject to that. There's some accelerated depreciation currently available for that type of asset, so taking the time to split that out is valuable, as well as looking at the structure itself. So the building, the walls, the bricks is one thing, but when you're looking at what can be treated as personal property, cabinets, appliances, the flooring, some window treatments and lighting and wiring and security systems. So if you take the time to break out the purchase price among those components, there's a lot more possibility for getting some accelerated depreciation without any more outflow of cash. So it's worth it. But as you kind of think about what goes into it, yeah, it accelerates depreciation. So we know that it knocks down your tax rates at ordinary rates. But there's the cost. So the second point here. So yeah, so you can't just make up these numbers. You do have to get some professional guidance on exactly how you are determining that allocation to cost. So sometimes it involves an engineering study, which can be a few $1,000s, but on a large enough property, the tax savings might be worth it. But also keep in mind passive loss limitations. So on a lot of these TikTok things, I think it's one I saw is this person walked through this scenario. of somebody with $300,000 of income, how they supposedly got it down to zero. Among other strategies, this cost segregation was one of them that supposedly knocked $150,000 off of his income. But yeah, that's not always possible, because if the income didn't come from other passive activities, these passive loss limitations can bite you in the butt there. So you might have a lot of real estate related losses that end up getting suspended because of passive loss limitations. So be careful of that. And then if you sell a property, in the next year or two, keep in mind that all this accelerated depreciation gets recaptured at an unfavorable 25% rate instead of a regular long-term capital gain rate. So depending on what you have in mind for the property long-term, it may not be, it may be better to just, if it's going to be sold in the next year or two, sometimes it may be better to just forego the deduction now, especially when you look at everything in its totality. And so you sell a property later on and have some more long-term capital gains, or just return of capital as opposed to recapture at 25%. So plenty to think about, but be careful if you get a sales pitch or this type of thing, because as with everything, it's not always as good as some people would make it sound. And another thought too, this is a passing thought I had this morning when I was driving in, and it regards owning an asset versus controlling an asset, and what's really best. And so the thought that came to mind is, I drove by a building here as a former client of mine, and I just remember, there was a business that was operating. There was some real estate, and not just here, but also in some other places. But overall, I remember we had to send in a financial statement to a bank, and you list your assets, you list your liabilities, and you come back with a net equity amount there. And in this case, the equity was always really low, because the guy was it was always very leveraged, always had a lot of capital in play. And as soon as something got more equity, and basically you use that power to get something else. So a lot of income coming in, not a lot of equity. So back then I was thinking, man, what a bad way to do things. You don't own anything. But think about the fact that when you have assets and you can borrow against them, it's just as good as money in a bank. So yeah, we know that there's potential that the banks may stop lending possibly, but if you got the money, the equity at work for you with more income generating assets, I would say controlling an asset by having a mortgage on it, and maybe there's not a lot of equity in it, but just by being able to control it, rent it out, control how much the rent is and that kind of thing, versus if you pay cash and just own it outright, you're limited because you can't control as much stuff when you're relying on your actual cash values to provide that equity. So I don't know. So low retained earnings or low owner's equity is not always a bad thing if you have the ability to borrow against those assets and just continue to control more stuff that generates more income. So I don't know. I'm starting to, in my old age here, I think that controlling is better than owning. So more flexibility and so on. So that's it for this week. Closing thoughts here for the week. As we getting into the political fray, this popped up this morning and I found it, I guess, appropriate. An educated human is a dangerous human. So I think the dangerous part of it is as the maybe the establishment would see you. If you're too smart, you're not easily controlled. And all these political debates and these Facebook posts about different candidates and whatnot, and I'm just seeing some of the either ignorance or lack of knowledge or whatever on both sides, and I'm just I don't know, I'm at a total loss. So anyway, have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you out here next week. Bye.
Yeah.